So let's just take a minute to calm our minds and sort of arrive in this moment. So letting go of any other thoughts from the day and our jobs or personal things, and just kind of arrive to the class. And now bring to mind the reason that you're here tonight. We have all kinds of different motivations. It's usually not just one thing. It may be to just calm your mind. It may be that you're going through a difficult time and are looking for support and community. And if you're really lucky, and I think for most of us, there is a part of us that's here because we really want to do something to make our lives meaningful and useful. We have a desire to help other living beings to reach our own potential. And so, to the extent that you have that motivation, if you could just focus for a couple of minutes on that. Tapping into that desire to be helpful. And then in keeping with that, the refuge prayer is just that. Refuge is a decision that when there are problems, frankly, even when there are not problems, that there is one thing that can help. There's the wisdom of the Buddha, that would be the Dharma. There's the Buddha, the one who taught that wisdom and whose mind holds all of those enlightened thoughts. And then there is the Sangha, the community of practitioners who have gained those realizations and are holding them in their mind also. And then we can also think of, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in more nominal terms, like just thinking of the teachings, thinking of Gautama Buddha, the Buddha, and thinking of Sangha as the ordained community. So the various ways that we understand these, making a decision that if we're looking for help, feeling that those are the sources for that hope, not only for ourselves, but for all beings. And so dedicating ourselves to them. So I'll say it once in English, and then a couple times I'll do the Tibetan. And again, if you can just listen and we can talk about it if you have questions. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential that I create by practicing giving and the other perfections, may I attain the state of a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. Sangye chodong soki chodnam ra, jangchu bodu dagni kyatsu chi, dagi jinso kipe sonangi, dola penche sangye dupasho. Sangye chorong soki chonam la. Changchu badu dagni kapsu chi. Dagi jinso kibe sonam ki. Dola panche sangye upasho. Okay, so welcome everyone. This class is really meant to be for you. So far in my experience with the virtual stuff, people aren't always jumping in and chiming in or asking questions, which is totally fine. But I want to make sure that there's space for that, because this is called, being your own therapist, right? So I would say all of us all the time have lots of things that we could be working on in our own minds, right? Working on our minds. So there's no shortage of things we could talk about, but I want to kind of open it just to see what any of you have in mind. If you have anything, or if you want to just raise your hand, whatever you're more comfortable with. How about that? How about I'll take a minute, no pressure. But if there's something that you would like to discuss, I'd like to start with that. And if not, then I've got some ideas about what we'll talk about this evening. But I don't know, any burning questions, thoughts? I'll give 1 minute so I won't keep you guys hanging in limbo for too long.
Yeah, I have something.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the be your own therapist and the Buddhist kind of philosophy is about tending to yourself. However, like sometimes, I don't think I'm the only one, I'm in the presence of somebody who is flipping out. And I heard today, I was listening to Gabor Mate in an interview, and he was talking about adults when they throw tantrums, that there are children who basically have not grown into adults. And he said something interesting, and he said that there's a difference between self-repression, repressing the self, and regulating the self. And I've thought about some people that I have been in the presence of lately who have become so enraged with something that, and I'm sitting there in that energy, in that presence, and I don't know what to do from any perspective. And so I don't know if you have any insight on that, but what is a Buddhist perspective when you are in the presence of somebody who is not able to regulate themselves? So
Wow.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, so it's perfect, because actually it's somewhat tangentially related to kind of the direction I was thinking of going for the discussion. So thank you for that, but not directly. So I want to make sure that first I sort of answer your question. So from a Buddhist perspective, the reason we're talking about looking at our own mind is, well, I would say practically, there's one reason. Practically, that's the one thing we can actually control and do, to the extent that we can control that. And I think there's various degrees, right? Sometimes we're the ones that are going off the rails. It's all, degrees, right? All on a spectrum. But from a Buddhist perspective, there's a couple different ways of looking at it. When we talk about all sentient beings, I find it super helpful, and there's lots of teachings on one or the other of these positions, but one is to contemplate that every being is your teacher. And so sometimes they're teaching you what not to do, how not to be. Often, if someone is going off the rails, it's a test for us. Like, can I be well in the face of that, right? Can I learn how to hold boundaries for myself, which we're here to serve all living beings, but if we don't have boundaries and self-care, then we're not going to be able to do that job, right? So when someone manifests like they're out of control, or we're having a challenging situation with them, now granted, in the heat of the moment, it sometimes can be difficult to just switch on that kind of way of thinking, which is why we have a class like this or our own meditation practices, because that it's practice. It gives us an opportunity to contemplate these things so that when they come up in our life, we can actually access the tools that are in the toolbox. So that's one part of it is recognizing, so many things. They're providing us an opportunity to practice patience, generosity of thought. And these are not trivial things. From a Buddhist perspective, there's two things. So to become a Buddha, which is a being who is completely free of suffering, has completely fulfilled their own needs, and is actively fulfilling the needs of others. To become that kind of being, we are working on two different things. So I don't know how many classes you've taken, but you'll probably hear, this wisdom and bodhicitta, like two wings of the bird. You need both to fly to enlightenment. So bodhicitta is also sometimes called method. So you also hear it called method and wisdom. And the method, one of the methods is practicing the perfections. So one of those is patience. So when someone does kind of goes out, it gets crazy on us. That's an opportunity for us to practice compassion and patience towards them, right? Sort of taking ourselves out of the situation. And then, so that's one thing, that we can see them as teachers. And more than that, we can use them as teachers. This is the beauty. It doesn't matter if they are intentionally trying to teach us, intentionally trying to help us. They're still providing that opportunity. All these sentient beings they're the beings with whom we create merit, that we practice the method. And the other thing is that we want to help all living beings. So if you look at someone who's in a situation like that, I don't think it takes a huge leap to really understand that they're in some kind of profound suffering, right? So these are nothing I'm saying is saying, what you should do, right? Which is, then you have to get down to the brass tacks of what do you do? But everything that we do starts first as a thought. So it's like, how do I think of this person? How do I think of this situation? How can I think of this situation and this person that's going to be helpful to me, right? And then if I'm thinking of them in that way, then what makes sense in terms of how I interact with them? So again, I know it's not an answer like, what do you say? Because it depends, right? There's not a set thing to say or do, but there's a way of thinking that can be really helpful. So I'll pause there because, yeah, I'm not sure that that's really answers your question. But I think that's the reason that we are focused on, ourselves, because that's what we can do. And then when I see something, or when we see something happening in our world, I think the question is always, where is the seed of that in myself, right? If it's existing, and then this is actually much more, if you're grounded in the wisdom teachings, which are the teachings on reality, or if you hear the words emptiness, and again, I don't know where people are, but if I'm seeing something in this world, it's proof that I have created somehow the causes, right? Now, that's not a self-blame. That's not saying I'm responsible for someone else's actions. But what it's saying is that my experience is coming from seeds that are in my mental continuum. And so it's really helpful to stop, maybe not in the moment with that person, but afterwards looking back and, so what have I done? What am I doing? Subtle, small things, right? Because karmic seeds, just like physical seeds, they operate the same way. They grow. They start out very small and they grow. So we're looking at somebody doing a huge explosion acting completely out of order. Well, I could say, I don't do that. That's, I didn't create that. But if we look, there are subtle little things that we do, subtle little maybe overreactions or self-centered view. It's a question of like finding in our own hearts and minds where we are engaged in something similar. And I'm spewing a lot of stuff, so stop me, raise your hand, interject, because I don't want to go too far down the path, but I will talk about, I just want to mention along those lines, we have something called 4 powers. And I've talked about it before, I think in these classes, but it's ways that you can work to purify negative karmas that you've done. And I'm pretty sure I've given this example because for me, it's the crystal example that comes to my mind. Years ago, I was having an issue with someone, and I felt in that situation that I couldn't see how I was contributing to it. I really couldn't. I was really, sort of on my best behavior. It was in a Dharma context. So that's when I'm really kind of trying my very best. And I couldn't see where I had contributed to it. And I was having a conversation with Venerable Ravina, who's one of the other teachers, like kind of a famous teacher, great personality, big personality. And she's like, I almost want to imitate her accent, but I won't. Maybe I will. I don't know if I can. Anyway, she's like, darling, are you doing 4 powers? So I was like, yeah, I'm doing 4 powers. And then she's like, are you regretting? And I caught myself like in my heart, in my head, it was the thought like, I haven't done anything to regret. And that is a misunderstanding because even, and I'm sure it wasn't the case, but even if I were truly perfect in that situation, the very fact that I'm experiencing this is proof that I have done something that has given rise to this, growing, exponentially growing. That's what karma does. And it's not like a punitive self-flagellation kind of feeling, but it's as if you had ingested poison, like just the surety. It's not like, oh, I'm terrible, I did something that created this. It's like, oh my God, the fact that I'm seeing this, the fact that nothing comes from nothing, everything comes from causes. Everything is coming from my mind. I am seeing this because I have planted a seed for that. And I may not be able to recognize what that is or identify exactly, but just having that strong sense of like, I've ingested poison. I regret. And then that's the next thing. I regret. Now you can have regret, right? But so long as I was thinking, I haven't done anything, then how can I cultivate the regret that's necessary to kind of squash it? So again, maybe that's too much information, but just kind of saying why we're focused on ourselves and our own minds. But all that is the party line, and I buy it 100%. But I also want to have the space to, if you have like a specific thing that you are dealing with, this should also be a great time for brainstorming on the practicalities of like, what do I do with this guy? So I don't know if you want to go there, but I'll be quiet for another minute and give you an opportunity. Or if anybody else, yeah.
Thank you very much for that response. I haven't been to one of these in a while, and I really needed that kind of reorientation. So it's like, when you were talking about the 2 wings of the bird, it's, when I see somebody in distress and totally dysregulated, I think I need to do something to help. But at the same time, I realize if I intervene, that they're not sitting with what they need to sit with, and there's no growth, and then I'm now somehow pulled in a way. So it's kind of like, when do you when do you have the wisdom, which do you go with at one time? Is the wisdom and the wisdom and the compassion. So I really thank you for your answer, because that was beautiful, and it was insightful, and it's exactly what I needed to hear. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that that's the case. In terms of like what our actions are, though, I think one thing, like whether or not to intervene, sometimes I think in anything that we're doing, we started this class talking about what's our motivation, right? And so when someone is acting out, I think it's helpful. It's super helpful for me to look at what's my motivation. What is it that I want to get out of it? Is this about trying to help another person? Is this about feeling better about myself? Is it attachment to an outcome, that I want? Like, it's sort of like, you practice, you can practice things like, oh, I'm going to be the bigger person. Oh yeah, but what if they slam the door on you? Are you going to get angry? Right. And so, just really looking at ourselves, like, what is it that I want out of this? And then based on that, making decisions about what we're going to say and do. And then really trying not to judge someone else, right? Because we never really know what's going on in their head, right? And kind of back to that idea, like everyone could be a teacher. I mean, the reality is they could be a person who's totally enlightened, and they are doing every single thing to push your buttons to force you to do your own like internal investigation and progress on the path. And again, we don't have to be hung up on whether or not it's true. They could actually be totally out to get you. They could be completely lost in the sauce. All those things could be true. But the question is, what's helpful in terms of developing myself into someone who can be most helpful, right? And enlightened beings have that gift to be able to say, they say the right thing, and the right thing might look like the wrong thing at a given time, right? We don't know. But for me, it's helpful to kind of think like that. When I said earlier that I was thinking about your question, kind of brought to mind what I was sort of thinking as an idea of something to talk about today was actually self-love, which not exactly what your question was related to, but like looking at ourselves and in good ways or negative ways. So I kind of have to just address that in the last few weeks, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our head of FPMT, my personal teacher, passed away, went into paranirvana, we say. And I'm feeling a little bit like a spiritual orphan, kind of shocked at how it feels. I haven't lost my parents, so I don't know what that feels like, but to me, this is what it feels like. Like there's no, I don't want to say daddy, but there's no daddy there now, not that he's not there from my perspective, but I don't have the same kind of access, And so I think a lot of us are feeling that it's really time to kind of double down on our own personal practices and trying to achieve all of the things that he would like to see in the world. And anyone who is familiar with him, like he was just a nonstop virtue machine, like truly giving. I honestly, there's really not words. But in light of that, I've had conversations with a couple of people who are, feeling challenged and struggling and feeling not that they haven't. And I guess if I'm honest, I would include myself among them, just recognizing my shortcomings, the advice that I didn't take enough of, don't feel like I've practiced enough of, and I know other people have felt the same. And I was talking to someone else, and it's so funny when you're, when you're in this position and kind of leading a discussion or a class, you say the things that you even need to hear yourself. I think so. People coming to me struggling with, their own feelings of inadequacy, and we have this precious opportunity, should have done more, done better, and I'm feeling the same way. But it brings to mind to me that this truth of like needing to start with ourselves. I don't remember the exact quote, but there was a little thing that Lama Yeshe had said. It was basically not rocket science. It was first be gentle with yourself. Then you can be gentle or be kind to yourself. Then you can be gentle with other living beings. And so I think about, if I want to cultivate bodhicitta, like if I want to cultivate love for every living being, I really do have to start with myself. But that means, and this is true for all of us, but that means really understanding what it means to love ourselves, right? It's not, we talk about self-cherishing as being a problem, and it is. Self-cherishing is I before all others, I'm the most important. I need, other sentient beings are countless. I'm one, but this one should have everything. It's that kind of a mind. But this one is the one that we know. Like, everyone else, we see a veneer, we see moments, we see, little bits and pieces of data, and then we formulate a story and a picture about all those other people, right? Good or bad. But there's one being that we have, and that's ourselves, that we have real intimate acquaintance with, right? So I thought, take some time to actually I wanted to do a Tonglen meditation, which is typically, it's giving and taking, so on the breath, but thinking about ourselves and developing that, because if I can't cultivate compassion and love for the one that I know, the one that I really, if I can't give her a break, if I can't understand her, how can I possibly have that love or compassion for other living beings? It came up for me. I had two different people who were struggling with this, and it occurred to me that this is what they needed. Not that I know what everybody needs, but I felt very strongly like they need to develop. They've worked so hard on, Lamrim, on, trying to develop renunciation, on practicing compassion, meditating on all of these methods, but they had really kind of skipped over the first one. So before we do that meditation, I'm wondering, does that seem like something that would be, now that I've said that that's what I want to do, I guess that kind of blew it. But is that okay with you guys? Does that sound like something that could be potentially beneficial? And I'll say this, if you feel like you've already got it nailed, then this will just be like an exercise and maybe how you can help someone else who doesn't seem to be loving themselves and maybe bashing themselves. And then afterwards, we can talk about how this is not self-cherishing, right? Just kind of self-understanding. So I think the most helpful way is probably doing it similarly to when we're doing it with someone else. So let's visualize like a mirror image of yourself, right? Like the one that has the wisdom and is doing the practice right now, and the total being of you, right? So let's stop for a minute, and mostly me because I've been talking. So again. get to the now. Let's watch a couple breaths. Now, imagine a mirror image of yourself sitting across from you. And actually, if it's helpful, maybe start with you as a child, visualizing that person, the person that you are, that time in your mental continuum, childhood. And just reflect on your youth, the things that you maybe were afraid of, things that you wanted, childhood struggles. You can reflect on shortcomings that you have. You know this child very well. And no matter what, you know that you tried your best. Always. Think about the hurts this child experienced, whether they're physical, emotional. So easy to just say, oh, that's nothing, but try to recall what it felt like at the time. Don't trivialize the sufferings of this child. And as much as you can, just take a minute to flesh out that child version of yourself. So you feel a strong sense of compassion, wanting to take the hurt away, and love, wanting to give them happiness. Now, moving forward in time, imagine, see yourself growing into adolescent or young adult. And again, recall that life story. Recall those struggles, the heartaches, the things you wanted but never got, the traumas, the things you were afraid to even wish for. Mistakes you made, like understanding wrong. You were just always trying to be happy, like everyone. And again, bring that story to mind so that you're really feeling all of your different sufferings and challenges until you feel again really overwhelming compassion, wanting to take away all the suffering, feeling you just want to be happy and everyone that you deserve to be happy. And the love that wishes all the happiness for that young person. You have been forward adult version of you up to now. How far you go, things you've wanted, how you had loneliness, physical limitations. It's like every living being you just want to be happy. Everything you do is coming out of that wish for happiness, even though sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Really try to develop that strong feeling again, with compassion. How wonderful it would be not to have this suffering, that you just want to be happy, that you deserve to be happy. Now, imagine your future self no matter what, the time will come when everything will be ripped away from you. Your friends and family will pass away, and eventually even you will pass away. We don't know what that's going to look like as the pain and sickness that may be in the future, the heartaches that may be in the future. We don't know that when there will be, but we know there will be some. It's very sad that this person has to go through this thing. Compassion, wishing that you could help them not to endure all of the painful things in life. It's okay to wish them, to wish yourself happiness. Think how wonderful it would be to be able to remove all of that suffering, all of this pain, just to have wisdom, love, light, peace. And make a decision that you're going to work to do that for yourself. Now, let's shift your attention from them. Try to think of some little small, self-centered thing that you may have said or done recently. It doesn't have to be good, just something that comes to your mind. Some thought or something you said or did that represents a small version of you, not who you want to be. Something selfish that you regret. Now imagine that act of body's returning. Imagine that as a tiny little seed at your heart, and it is powerful. Because at the center is that selfishness, that ignorance that keeps the whole cycle of suffering going. And then make a decision that you're going to destroy all the suffering of yourself at the same time as destroying the little seed of selfishness. Now, over the next few breaths, imagine a mirror image of yourself that you are, with each breath, drawing the suffering out of yourself, and imagine that comes accumulating as a black lumbering cloud in front of your face. So with every breath, imagine all that suffering, like black smoke, coming out of you, and then just lingering in the air in front of you. Take a few minutes and really feel that you're using the breath to remove all that suffering. Now imagine it like a hurricane, some powerful thunderstorm right in front of you. And then we're going to, on the count of 3, we're going to breathe that in, but you're going to use it because it's so powerful and destructive. You're going to use it and draw it in with our breath to that little seed of selfishness at our foot, that powerful little black ball of ignorance and self-centeredness. And we're going to use that cloud of suffering to destroy that seed of selfishness. And it's going to be like an atomic explosion of our heart. It's just going to totally eradicate all the negativity, all the ignorance, all the selfishness. So on the count of 3, breathe that in. 1, 2, 3. Now really feel that has completely destroyed that selfishness at your heart. And that explosion is just filling your entire body with warmth and light and happiness and love. There is not one iota of suffering left. And you can feel then that light, that warmth radiating from your body, radiating like rays of light, touching all the people, all of the beings in your house, in your community, in your family, in your country, on this planet. You can imagine that you're like a sun shining rays of wisdom, happiness to countless beings and countless planets. And that just every time the ray of light touches them, that it purifies their negativities, that it takes away their suffering, that it gives them happiness. And just sit and imagine, just feel what it's like to be yourself completely free of suffering and totally available, totally blessing and helping countless beings. Imagine that this is what you're meant to do and do. Don't be afraid to wish to be this. This is what a Buddha does. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back into the space. So I'm apologize for the imperfect pace and anything that didn't fit. But hopefully you have the idea of kind of what the practice is aimed at yourself. And then hopefully there's some, just from doing it, generated some awareness of why it would be it's so valuable, so important to cultivate that for ourselves. So, I don't know, anybody have comments, questions, critique? Like, it's like, hey, that's too fast, or I had trouble with this, or, really, truly anything. Okay. So we have a little bit of time left, and I guess I thought, what I'd love to ask, if you're up for it, is maybe try to, it doesn't have to be a full-blown meditation, but maybe over the next week, between now and next Tuesday, if you could just try to remember this practice, and hopefully you were able to cultivate some feeling of compassion for yourself. And so maybe if you could, try to do either do the practice or some kind of abbreviated version. And then we can talk next week about, how that relates to bodhicitta. And I think I have talked about it a little bit, right? Like, how can you have compassion for others if you can't? If you can't, so there's this thing that we do. And I think it's to try to just deal with the world, which is to kind of, rank different sufferings, of ourselves and others, right? Like, oh, there's people in Ukraine and they're going through this, so my suffering is not such a big deal. Or, oh, my childhood suffering, when the kids in the 5th grade didn't like me and everybody ganged up on me, like, that's just childhood stuff. It doesn't matter. But wanting to get out of samsara, so actually off of bodhicitta, but they're related, obviously, and onto renunciation. Renunciation is a zero tolerance policy. Like, it's a decision that suffering is not okay. Like, there's no amount of it that's okay. There's no amount of it that we should have a tolerance for, right? So I know we have to walk through the world, and it can be really challenging, people who are very sensitive, but I think if we have the tools to do something that can really truly help with our own mind, then it helps us to be able to kind of brave those situations and open our hearts, to really see, like, there's all of it's garbage. There's none of it that, in a Buddha paradise, the tiniest suffering does not exist for them. And so, building that thought that, instead of ranking, like, I guess that would be another thing. Take a look over the next week at how many times you are, and I'll do the same, that I'm ranking suffering, making a decision that this person's suffering is not as bad as that one, whether it's me or someone else, or not having compassion for myself. So, like, imagine you have a good friend and they're going through something. I don't know, maybe they're having a separation or from a loved one. That seems to be, there's tons of that happening all over. Looking at them and saying, well, hey, there's worse things that could happen. So-and-so's partner died, or, oh my gosh, look at all those people in Ukraine who are ripped away from their loved ones. Those things are true. But if that's what you say to your friend who's suffering, you're not much of a friend, right? So, take a look, or someone who's sick, they're complaining, we always know people who complain about what seem trivial, oh, they've got a headache, and oh, they're tired, and even if we're not saying it, in our heads, are we like, oh my gosh, they're always complaining, that's nothing, it's not a big deal. Kind of just watching our minds, like, how often are we just deciding that suffering is okay, that it's something that we shouldn't be concerned with, and just understanding that, renunciation is the opposite of that. It's seeing this place for what it is, which is endless suffering, none of it good, and none of it anything that we should want to or have to put up with. There's a way out. So we have 3 minutes, and I have really talked a lot. So I want to take one of those minutes to just open it up again before we dedicate. So anything come to mind?
Bonnie, for me, it reminds me of one of the verses, and I can't remember, it's the 6th or the 5th verse of mind training, where it says, when if I find people like that, I need to hold them as my teacher. And I had been thinking about that. And then last week I don't even remember which class it was and who said it, but somebody said, look, if we've lived an infinite number of lifetimes, we have done all of those things. Yes, I've been compassionate and caring and wonderful and helped people move forward, but I've also been deviant and destructive. And I've been that adult throwing tantrums, right? And so absolutely to say, we're really good at saying what's wrong with that person, right? But we usually don't even we're not really asking that because we want to know. We're asking that more as a statement, but we never really go, what was wrong with me when I did it?
Yeah. We don't say, what was the suffering, what are the things that brought rise to that, right? Like the pathetic attempt to be happy, like the misunderstandings that give rise to that kind of behavior. Yeah, it's a great equalizer, right? Just recognizing that. And I had another teacher. So then, it goes on like, more precious and more rare than a wish-fulfilling jewel, right? So the wish-fulfilling jewel, I'll just briefly, a wish-fulfilling jewel gives you everything you ever wanted. The wish-fulfilling jewel is so amazing, you don't even know what to wish for, right? Like you don't even know. Our wishes are so small and tiny, like we're afraid to wish big, right? But these beings who try our patience, the reality is they will become rarer and rarer and rarer as we tame our own minds. Like that's the kind of magic of that's because they are empty. As we purify our minds, this is how a Buddha, ends up in a paradise world, because their mind no longer is not receiving it in the same way, right? Because it's not self-existently anything. And I know that's a hard one to get our minds around, but I think it's a fun one to contemplate that, that these beings will indeed become rare and rarer for us. So we should treat them, and again, treat them, at least in our minds, right? Sometimes the test is, so if I'm giving up 8 worldly dharmas and I don't want to, 8 worldly dharmas, like I want to look like a nice person. I want to look like a good dharma practitioner, right? Well, so what does that mean? It means I let somebody do something terrible. It's like you have to give up how things appear. You have to know what your own motivation is and go forward and do what appears to be the right thing, understanding that it is appearances. That's what we're doing. So that maybe is a little bit off topic, but I appreciate the comment. It is exactly like that verse. And we have actually been everything. And then when we are manifesting like that, who was that little kid that was Hitler? Or who was that? Who is that? I was just on vacation. I was in Europe and they said, which I guess I had heard before, but didn't remember. He wasn't accepted into art school, and you think, oh, geez, but the suffering, like the ego suffering, the hurt, it's just so, all the terrible things come from that. We all just want to be happy and we just go about it the wrong way. So anyway, I appreciate your time. I don't want to go really over, but I do want to dedicate, especially now, I personally want to dedicate to the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, that sun, that goodness in the world, that nonstop virtue machine. And actually pray for the long life of all of the teachers who help us along the path, for all of the friends who support us in trying to move ourselves forward towards enlightenment, and dedicate that we can help, that we will help, that we will become capable beings to be able to remove suffering of others and achieve liberation, enlightenment. So tonight goes in the piggy bank of enlightenment. So thank you all so much. I'm so happy. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you guys for, like, once again, showing up. I'm super grateful.
Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate everything you do for us.